Hello and welcome to another member request video. This request is for February of 2025. And if you want to request a review, you simply need to be a Patreon member or a YouTube member. So I randomly select one short that's not a Warner Brothers short, just to mix things up a bit and provide more value to members. So the short that was chosen for this month is The Bear That Wasn't, released in 1967 via MGM, and it was directed by Chuck Jones and Maurice Noble. Sadly, at the time of this recording, this isn't restored. Then again, it may end up showing up restored later on as soon as I release this review, but in any case, we'll make do with what we have. You can find this on the Looney Tunes Gold Collection Volume 3 DVD set, and yes, I'm aware it's not a Looney Tune, but they like to add some of these shorts in there. And also, it's on the third disc on the Looney Tunes Platinum Collection Volume 1 Blu-ray set. So it's not on the DVD, it's on the Blu-ray set. But in case you haven't seen this one, it is under copyright. I mean, I have seen it around online, so honestly, if you want to watch the short and not listen to a review, I'm pretty sure you can easily find this. But in case you haven't seen it, a bear wakes up out of hibernation and his entire surroundings has changed into a factory setting. And the people of this factory, they refuse to recognize him as a bear. So it's based on the concept of people believing a repeated idea, even though it may not be true. The bear eventually becomes convinced that he is a human because everyone else insists on it. And the moral of the story is that people never change due to outside influence. And of course, it satirizes corporate culture, so every time the bear goes to a different level, which we'll go through in just a moment, everything gets more and more luxurious, showing that, yeah, the higher up you get, the more fancy things are. I guess nothing really has changed, has it? But in any case, so there's a lot of trivia for this one, and this one's actually quite an interesting choice that one of the members has chosen here. So first up, you'll notice the name Frank Tashlin. So that's the big trivia for this one. So it's an adaptation of a children's book he did called The Bear That Wasn't, and it was released in 1946. So 1946 for Tashlin was him leaving Warner Brothers for the final time, doing a lot of gag writing. He even did another animated short for a different studio as well. So he was a bit all over the place, but he also wrote the children's book, and this was the period before he ended up directing those perhaps more well-known projects of his, like the Jerry Lewis films, which if you haven't seen, definitely see. So that's the period of time that Tashlin did this, and it's a nice little book. I actually had a chance to look at it recently again, and it's a nice little children's book. It's got a strong message in it, and of course the art's great as well. I mean, Tashlin may have been a director, but he was certainly a wonderful artist too. But what may interest you is that Tashlin had no involvement in this short whatsoever. In fact, that was actually Chuck Jones's idea. At the time, only producers could get Oscars, so the theory was if this film wins an Oscar, Tashlin would get an Oscar, because he never actually had won an Oscar, be it in his cartoon career or in his film career. So there was an interview with Michael Barrier, and I'm just going to quote you parts of this interview. Unfortunately, Michael Barrier's site is currently down at the time of this recording. I'm not sure why, but there is an article about this short on Cartoon Research. Just type in the name of the short and you'll be able to definitely find it. One thing I just want to point out as well is that while this is an adaptation of Frank Tashlin's book, you have additional story elements by Irv Spector. So here's the quote by Frank Tashlin. And I apologize, I can't do a New Yorker type accent, but hey, I'll have to do what I can, right? With the exception of maybe your best girlfriend running you over in your own car, this was about the worst experience I ever had, the making of that cartoon. I did that book a long time ago in 1948. I mean, he's misquoted, 1946, but anyway, back to it. And everyone wanted to make an animated cartoon. I heard from studios in Europe all over, and it was kind of precious and special to me, and I said no. Gilbert Seldes, who was at Disney's at the time, called me and says, I want to get Walt to get this, and I said no, they chew it up, it'd be no good. Anyhow, the thing was translated into many languages, and it was always the thing I liked. Then about 5 years ago maybe, this interview was conducted in 1971, Chuck called me and said he would like to do it as an MGM cartoon, and I said without reservation, fine, because I had seen the thing Chuck had made called The Dot and the Line, where they had gotten a book and faithfully put the book on the screen, and that's all I wanted. So I said, fine. We made a deal. He said, I'm going to give you producer credit on it. I said, what for? I'm not producing it. He said, in case we win an Academy Award, you'll get one. That was marvelous, and he had received many Academy Awards, so I went away to make a picture. I never went near it, because I figured that it was in the best hands. Why worry about it? The guy was going to take the book and put it on the screen, and he was a very capable man. I went to see it in the theater, and the thing started, and I guess it wasn't into a minute and a half where they had done a thing that destroyed the whole picture, and that's why I never got anywhere. They destroyed the cartoon with one little thing. I saw that, I almost cried. I never talked to Chuck about it. I've never talked to him since, and not long after this interview, Tashlin did pass away. It was a terrible thing. This bear, he goes to sleep under a factory. When he wakes up, they try to convince him that he's a man, as you well know, and he keeps insisting that he's a bear. That's the point of it. Up front in the beginning of this thing, when they're telling him that he is a man and he's insisting he's a bear, they put a cigarette in his mouth. Now, the picture was destroyed there, because by the acceptance of a cigarette, you never saw where he got it. By putting a cigarette in his mouth, he was already a man. You know what I mean? Psychologically, the picture was ruined, and it stopped working from that point on. So that was a terrible experience. Yeah, tell us how you really feel, Tashlin. And I get it. I really do. But I personally still enjoy the short, but I can understand why Tashlin would be miffed by that one little bit, and I can see his point of view. And it was good that Michael Barry was able to interview Tashlin a few times before his passing. I believe there was another interview scheduled, but unfortunately Tashlin passed away not long after. But regardless of the outcome, I actually think it's quite commendable, and Tashlin even agreed in that quote I just said to you guys, that Chuck had good intentions here. He wanted to do this, but Jones definitely had a habit of altering things to his own artistic sensibilities. Even if you look at The Grinch That Stole Christmas, Chuck added some of his own sensibilities in there. He added the dog, and of course those musical bits in there. So this would be a similar thing. He had his own touches to it, but in this case, whether it works or not, I'll leave that up to you, but Tashlin certainly was not happy. But the other big thing about this short is that this is actually the last theatrical short from MGM. So they started way back in 1930, and it went all the way up to now, 1967. And this was basically the quote-unquote Chuck Jones period. So Chuck Jones made a whole lot of Tom and Jerry shorts, and was also involved in the re-release of some of the older Tom and Jerry shorts where the Mammy character was redrawn into a white Irish woman. And of course, he also did the Dot and the Line, and then MGM around this point was getting more into television animation and feature animation with the Phantom Toll Booth, which would prove to be the last project overall for their animated unit before it was completely shut down. So essentially, you had the Tom and Jerry's, you had the Dot and the Line in the midst of that, you had the Grinch towards the end of that run, and then this short, which was the second and final one-shot short that Chuck did at MGM. Then you had Horty Hears a Who, you had the Pongo special, and you had the Phantom Toll Booth. So that's the main output by Jones during his time at MGM. So for this short, the main voice is done by Paul Frees. And if you don't know who Paul Frees is, he was definitely a prolific voice actor. He did many projects, and his range was very wide as well. Chances are you would have heard Paul Frees and not realized that was him. He's that good. So he does the voice of the narration here, plus the other male voices. You also have Gloria Wood, who was the vocalist, when you hear all the women singing the whole come in bit as we go along. But yeah, you'll definitely notice in the credits that this was co-directed by Maurice Noble. And by this point, yeah, Chuck and Maurice were more or less finishing each other's sentences, so they both had similar sensibilities, and just about all the best Chuck Jones directed shorts has Maurice Noble's involvement. So unlike most shorts, this one actually starts off into the story, introducing things, and then we get into the credits. If you look at the opening, it's quite clear that Jones and Noble used the book as inspiration in terms of how it all looks, and it looks really nice. I like how the leaves are accentuated, so the red, the oranges, and the yellows are emphasized, and the rest of it looks like it's very much a page from a storybook. But if you look at the bear's design, you can see that this is pure Chuck Jones right there, including when he actually even breaks the fourth wall for a brief moment, looks at the screen. I wonder if that irked Tashlin, that whole little bit of the bear breaking the fourth wall like that. We'll never know, of course. But we get the introduction where we establish that the bear, through his senses, he sees that the geese were going south, the leaves are falling, and now it's time for him to hibernate. And we see the title card, The Bear That Wasn't. We hear the song that's going to be used all throughout the short in various ways. And as I mentioned, that the vocals here are done by Gloria Wood. And music-wise, it's done by a person by the name of Dean Elliott. Dean had done a lot of the music for Jones around this period of time at MGM, but he would also continue with Jones past all of this and even do some music for Jones's return to Warner Brothers later on when he did his latest shorts, you know, the ones that everyone loves, like the sequel to Duck Dodgers and all that. Well, regardless of what you think about him, he did the music for him, and I think by that point, yeah, he was following a lot of Jones's sensibilities in regards to using certain classical tunes. But the score in this one, clearly 1960s, you hear the flute, but you even hear a few psychedelic type keyboard moments, guitar moments. If you listen to the score itself, regardless of what you think about the short otherwise, I think that there's some interesting things in this one. So we see the bear descending down into his cave and starting to hibernate. But then the next day, we see a moment which showed how great Chuck was when he came to limited animation. So the humans come around and everything gets destroyed, and of course the factory is built. So it's interesting to see that Chuck chose to make the excavator or digger or whatever you want to call it in your part of the world be like a character in itself. So it starts chewing up everything like it's a big dog or something, and then it sees one tree wasn't done, so he eats that tree and continues on. I do like these added touches that Jones puts here, especially with all the limited animation of how everything just gets cleared out and everything's just built. So this isn't full animation, but it tells the story, what's going on effectively. I guess when Tashlin was watching this, it might have been so far so good. He would have understood that this is another artist adapting his work, but he had trusted Chuck to do the right thing. And continuing using limited animation, we see the passage of time. So winter comes along, the factory's still in operation, and then spring comes along. And it's interesting to note, if you listen very carefully to the sounds being made of the actual flowers blooming in spring, it sounds very similar to some of the sound effects that were used in The Grinch, when Cindy Lou Who gets that big strawberry in one of the scenes. But we see that the bear's all sleeping, and he's going to be in for a very rude awakening. The bear realizes that it's spring, and it's a weird effect, isn't it, when he opens his eyes and sees all the flowers blooming. So I guess it's just to suggest that, hey, it's spring, time to wake up, and he's still kind of half asleep as he walks up. But I do like the facial expression that he makes once he exits the cave, which, yeah, if you really think about it, why would this door be next to the cave? I don't know, I'm not going to overthink it here, guys. I know I like to overthink these kinds of things, but in any case, he wakes up, he walks out of there, and he's shocked at what he sees. Hey, this is not the forest that he left behind when he went to hibernate. So he's shocked at what he sees as we get further and further out to see the enormity of this factory, and we even see a close-up of his eyes looking around going, what on earth is going on? And in a clever bit of animation, I do like this effect here where it's clearly break time, so everyone's rushed out to smoke, because of course everyone smoked back in the day, just about everyone did. So they would go out and have their cigarettes, and then, of course, break time's over. I'm assuming it's only like a 5-minute smoko break or whatever it is, and they end up going. So here's the bit that Tashlin had an issue with, that someone gave him the cigarette and a cup. Yeah, look, I don't think that would have been needed. I do kind of agree with Tashlin here. I think it would have been more effective if the bear didn't have any of that at all. He was just maybe sitting there, just maybe being shocked at everyone, at all these humans just, smoking, going out there and then just leaving, and it's like, what the heck was this? But you be the judge. But that detail aside, we now see the foreman who says, hey, coffee break's over. So I guess they call it a coffee break where you have your smokes, right? But anyway, coffee break is over, get back to work, and then we hear that the bear actually can speak, like he does in the story. He's like, oh, I don't work here. I'm actually a bear. And this is where we get the whole psychological aspect where it's like, oh, no, you're not a bear. You're a man with a silly coat, and so on. But we got this weird gag where not only is the foreman laughing his head off, but his actual button, I guess he really wants to show off that he's the foreman. Not that far off from what a lot of bosses do anyway. They like to show that they're actually bosses, right? So they're laughing their heads off, and the bear's like, no, I'm really a bear. And if you didn't know that Maurice Noble was involved in this, check out the next bit where you've got the foreman. He's not happy with the attitude of this supposed worker of his slacking off. So he gives him the stare, which ends up turning into this massive red line that goes around the bear. Noble will do that a lot. In fact, he even did that in one of the Hunting trilogy where there was like a long yellow line in that case. But that line ends up turning into an arrow, and we're going to now see the general manager who, poor thing, only has one secretary. So hopefully he gets promoted soon, because clearly you need more than one, right? So we see the general manager who has a haircut similar to Bart Simpson, I guess, but he's clearly not happy here, and he just outright says, "Nope, you're just a silly man who needs a shave and is wearing a fur coat." The bear's insistent, so I guess you gotta go up that elevator and go to the next manager, who is the third vice president, and he's got two secretaries. Musically, I like what Dean Elliott did here for Jones. As we get higher and higher up the hierarchy, we get more and more secretaries, and things get more and more musical, especially when we meet the president later on. So they see the third vice president, who says exactly the same thing. Nope, you are a silly man who needs a shave, wears a fur coat. So, as you can imagine, we're going to just go through a few cycles of these. But take note as well, the beautiful backgrounds done by Maurice. Some have argued that they're a little bit overpowering this short, and yeah, in a few scenes, I can definitely agree. But I do like the designs of the office here. Not only is it very much anti-wildlife, as you saw in the very beginning of the short, but here it's very corporate looking as well, if you get my meaning. But again, this third vice president, not happy with the bear's response. And again, this is all satirizing corporations, right? You can't make a decision. You just got to keep handballing it up the ladder, letting the bigger fish end up making the decisions. In fact, you know what this reminds me of? That Disney short Pigs is Pigs, where they needed to make the simplest of decisions regarding the difference between a guinea pig and a regular pig. So they end up going throughout this massive corporate ladder of sorts, going through all these different managers and somewhat, just to have one decision made that could be made by anyone, lower or down, because no one wants to take responsibility. So that's clearly what's happening here. But we now need to see the second vice president. So let's see if the second vice president now accepts him as a bear. He doesn't resolve the situation, now needs to go to the first vice president. So you could argue this is very repetitious, but I think it works. I think it's fine. And speaking of fine, the backgrounds again look really nice, and unfortunately there's no restored copy to use for this review, but I would imagine once it's restored it's going to look really amazing. After all, when the dot and the line got restored, it looks incredible, so I'd imagine we get the same result here. So we see the first vice president, and he says the same thing, although he does add the line, "and perhaps a manicurist," so maybe that's why he gets the big bucks, right? So he adds that extra thing that the other guys didn't think of. Nope, it's not resolved. Now we got to see the good old president. Up until now, we've seen every manager's face. I do like the design. They look quite varied, and I'm glad that they just didn't duplicate the same look for every single one. Everyone looks, well, different. But we don't see the president, who I'm assuming looks pretty decrepit, and we see only his finger. But here's the thing. I actually love this scene, right? And just how over the top stupid it is. So you see the president and everything is just so over the top. There's so many doors and you got so many secretaries, massive chandelier. And as I mentioned before, the whole thing with what Dean Elliott did music-wise, it started off basic when we were down to the general manager. But now here, you've got these secretaries just singing for the longest time. So the scene takes a lot longer just to get the introduction out of the way. Because, hey, it's the president. You gotta do the finest thing when it comes to the president's office, right? So the bear is pleading his case, saying, hey, look, all these managers, they've told me I'm just a man in the fur coat and all that. But he's trying to explain, no, he is not. The president counter-argues, well, if you were a bear, you wouldn't be here. You'd be in a circus or a zoo. Because remember, bears would be in circuses, not so much anymore, but back then they were. But the president is insistent that, no, I believe all my subordinates are correct, that you are a man, and that's that. Oh, and I like the added touch of the animation of the fingers of that first president. So, again, if you don't like this short, I think you would at least appreciate some of the little details in this one. The president just says, nope, I'm going to prove it, and the bear's thinking, well, I haven't had practice being anything else. So he's starting to now question his own beliefs. Wait a minute, maybe I'm not a bear? Maybe these people are actually right? So they all go to the zoo because clearly they don't need to run a company or anything, right? But anyway, they go to the zoo where the president asks the bears, as though they can actually talk. Oh, and look how overcrowded this cage is for the bears. It's not a particularly good zoo, I would say. But he asks him, hey, is this a bear? And the bear said, no, he's not a bear. Otherwise, why would he be out there? He'd be in here with us. And our main bear is just flabbergasted. He just doesn't understand. All this time, I thought I was a bear. Maybe I'm not. And even the little cub says, oh, he looks like he's just a silly man with a fur coat. So, yeah, I'd say the bear now thinks maybe he is a factory worker after all. So now we get a montage of sorts with the whole factory working take place. So the bear, he's now operating this machine. I'm not sure exactly what he's doing, but it does illustrate Chuck Jones's mastery at using limited animation but for great effect. So we see all the managers congratulating themselves on a job well done. They'll probably give themselves a raise as well. But we hear the reprise of the song, and unlike earlier in the short where it was done in a more naturalistic way, here it's very 60s psychedelic pop. If you listen to some of the instruments being used by Dean Elliott here, some of it sounds really funky, but it actually works pretty well. So we get a whole montage of this, and we then get to the end of the day where everyone is going home. But where does the bear live? The bear then notices the geese going south again, so he's tapping back into his inner bear. So even though his surroundings have changed, he still knows what time it is and it's time to hibernate again. Oh, and fun fact, if you've seen a very brief shot, that this is the Acme factory, so there's that as well. So the bear continues on, and we're noticing those wonderful autumn leaves that we saw earlier. So now he's following his own instincts and going his own way. But in probably my favorite scene here, and this is actually quite relatable to me, and I'll explain why in a sec, but he thinks he's following his own instinct, but then he has that self-doubt. Wait a minute, I'm not a bear. I can't go in here, I can't go in this cave like he's supposed to, right? And the way it's directed here is fantastic. So we hear the echo of Paul Frees's voice, and we just see a silhouette of the bear looking all afraid and shocked at this massive cave that, yeah, he's been there before, but now he's just got all this self-doubt. But winter's come around, and the bear is not in the cave like he should be, and he's still got that cigarette from earlier on. I wonder why he didn't just throw it out, but anyway. He even wishes that he was a bear so he didn't have to be out in the cold. But then he has this moment of self-realization. There's this one facial expression where he's like realizing, wait a minute, I don't care what anyone says. I'm a bear. I'm going to go in the cave. And he does. And he ends up sleeping for a long time, as bears do during hibernation. Because in the end, he realizes despite what everyone's told him to the contrary, he just didn't make it so. He's definitely a bear, and that's that. And he's not even a silly bear, he's just a bear. And we end right there. Okay, I get Tashlin's criticism regarding the cigarette. I think it was definitely overdone now that I look at it more closely. I still enjoy the short. I do like the message of it. The book is better, and like I said, I have read it. In fact, there's even an audio adaptation out there too that was done around that time. Some have even suspected that Tashlin himself wrote the liner notes. But aside from that one element, I quite enjoy this one. So as I mentioned before, there was definitely that one scene where I just found relatable. There'd be a lot of times where people would tell me what I am and who I'm supposed to be. And even though deep down I knew that wasn't so, I would still have those self-doubts, like the bear at the cave in this one. And then I finally accepted, no, I am who I am. Just because a lot of people say what I am supposed to be, or who they think I am, doesn't make it so. I guess I like this short more because I can relate to it, but I understand its shortcomings as well. There are definitely bits where Maurice Noble's production overpowers things. There's a lot to love about it, but there are a few shots that maybe go a little bit too far and dominate what's on the screen or what's supposed to be presented. Animation very limited here. Maybe that's just due to budgets, I don't know. But Jones was a master at limited animation. He would criticize Hanna-Barbera for the so-called talking radio in terms of their productions, but here his animation is just limited. It just happens to be a lot more stylized, and you can see a lot of the shortcuts in the name of art as well, especially during the factory scene. But in terms of a score, look, I mean, objectively, I have to give about 7.5 out of 10. It definitely has a few problems in it, but I do enjoy it because I can relate a lot to the message. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Anyway, of course, the members will see this first for 6 months, and then afterwards, when the non-members see this, yeah, I definitely want to know what you guys think. Do you think Tashlin was right to criticize this for the whole cigarette element? Do you think maybe he going on about nothing in relation to that point? I definitely am curious to know your thoughts. So that will do it for this one. And again, if you want to nominate a short that's not Warner Brothers, and you're not a member, maybe become a member.
Wanna be a member, wanna be a member. Yes.
You can definitely make suggestions, and I try and do these once a month. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
No, indeed. He wasn't a silly man. And he wasn't a silly bear either.